Hello everyone. In this video we'll learn how to play around with the labeled indices for the series items. So for the reference we are going to create this series first. So as you can see, it has names as Tom, Ben, Nick and Roy, and I want these items to have labeled indices as A, B, C and D. So how do we do it? Okay, so let us first import the required module, which is of course pandas, and then we'll create the series pandas.series. Then I'm going to use a list here again, and I'm going to write these names one by one inside it. So Tom, Ben, Nick and Roy. So Tom here, Ben, and then Nick, and then finally Roy. Okay, now this series is created but with positional indices, or you say default indices. Okay, so when you print it, let me actually run it, so you know that the indices are going to be 0, 1, 2 and 3, as I have not specified any labels for these indices. So how do we do it? So for specifying labeled indices, you just have to put a comma here after the data from which the series is to be created. Okay, so put a comma and then use the argument index is equals to, and inside another list you specify the number of index values one by one. So for Tom I want to have index value A, and then I want B, and then C, and then D. So this is that simple. So now when you run it, you can see, yes, that the labeled indices are now applied. Okay, now of course you can access these elements by any of these specified indices. So for example, if I want to access this name Nick from this series, so I can simply write print S, and then specify its labeled index, which is C. Okay, so now when you run the code, you can see that I am getting this name printed out. So I'm able to access this name like this. Okay, now one interesting thing that we need to understand after the series is created, that although we have specified the labeled indices, okay, these are the labeled indices, but behind the scenes, in the background, you should say, the default indices, they also exist, okay, for each of these items. So what it means is, for this item A, you have index 0, for this you have 1, for this you have index 2, and for this you have 3. They also exist, and what do we call them? We call them positional indices. Okay, but to test that they exist along with these labeled indices, we have to try this here in our code. So let me simply write S0 here. So I should get this name Tom printed on the screen. So let's run this code now, and yes, as you can see, so this directly means that once you specify the labels as your indices, or simply once you specify user defined indices, the default indices, they also exist. Another thing is that in order to access multiple elements from the series, you can always use slicing, and slicing works in exact same manner as what we saw in case of list. So let's try out few examples. So for example, I want to display the values Ben, Nick and Roy. Okay, so I have I can use either the labeled indices for this purpose, or I can use the default indices also, as they also exist. So what you can simply write is, so S, and then you know how to apply slicing. Okay, if you don't know and if you want to know about slicing, you can watch the videos that I have made on slicing in one of those list videos. Okay, so your concepts will be clear. All right, so I have to write the index B here, and then of course colon, and then I have to write the stop index, which is D. Now the interesting thing here is that you know that whenever you apply slicing, the stop index is not included. That's what we have seen. So when you specify string type of index labels, which is what is the case right now, okay, so in that case the stop index will also be included. So this is one property that you have to remember. So when you run the code, you can see that I am able to access values Ben, Nick and Roy, that is from B to D. Okay, and D is also included. And of course you can always use the, what do you call it, step parameter here, which is of course a numeric value, and you can skip elements while doing slicing. So when you run the code, again, as you can see that I'm getting Ben and Roy getting printed, and Nick is skipped because you have written 2 here in the step parameter, which of course means that you want to skip one value while applying slicing on this series. So this is what happens when you use labeled indices while doing slicing. Now let's see what happens when you apply numeric values, numeric indices, or the positional indices in slicing. So let me simply write here as 1 colon 1 is the index of this item, then 2, and then 3. These are the positional indices for these 3 values. Okay, so now I am going to use these numeric indices here for printing Ben, Nick and Roy. So let's continue then. So 1 I have written, and then I can write 3 here. So it seems that it should print the desired output, but when you run it, you see that I'm getting only Ben and Nick printed here, which of course means that the stop index is not getting included. So this property I hope you already know. So the moment you use a numeric index value in slicing, the same property applies, which says that the stop value is not going to be included. But when you use string type of indices, or what do you say, labeled indices, then the stop index will be included. So this is one little thing that you should remember. Okay, so this is how you apply labeled indices. And of course you can apply various different types of indexing indices on a series, like you can also specify float type of indices if you want. So for example 1.5, and then for 1.6, and then 1.7 and 1.8. so let me delete this line, and now when you look at the output, you can see that these things are applied. So the thing is, you can have any type of immutable object, as you can use any type of immutable object as your index for a series. Okay, so what are the immutable objects? You can have int type of indices, you can have str type of indices, you can even have a tuple type of indices if you want, and as you can see, you can have these float type of indices. Okay, so I don't know who uses these type of indexing on a series, but yeah, so I just wanted to tell you that concept. All right, so now let's play around with few more things with user defined indices. Let me go back to the previous, yes, ABCD, fine. Okay, Now one more thing that I wanted to explain is that if you know slicing, you know that there is something called as negative indexing. Okay, this is what we saw in case of list. So while doing slicing, in order to access elements, you can also use negative indexing on a series. So that works perfectly fine. So let me show an example. So example, if I write s square bracket -1 colon -3 colon -1. Okay, so what am I doing here? So starting from index -1 and stopping at index -3, and this -1 tells that we are going in the reverse direction, and we are not skipping any value. So this element Roy has the index -1, this is -2, and this is -3. Now obviously -3 is a number, so this value will not be included in slicing. So we should get Roy and then Nick printed on screen when you run the code. So let us run the code now, and as you can see, Roy and Nick are getting printed. So this is how you can use negative indexing as well for accessing elements by using slicing. Now one interesting thing about these labeled indices is that you can also have one index value repeated for multiple elements. So for example, let me repeat this index A for Nick and Roy as well. Okay, so it might seem to you that it should show an error because the indices are supposed to be unique. Well, they are unique. As you know, the default indices are always unique, but this is also a property that you can use in order to access a specific set of elements from a series. And this is so useful when your series is containing thousands of values in it. Okay, so you can label them and you can group them with one single label value, and you can access them all very easily. So how do you do it? So since we have 3 elements labeled with the same index value A, so in order to access all the elements having index A, by simply writing print S and A, it is that simple. So when you run the code now, you can see that although I have written only one index value here, okay, I am able to access all the elements that are labeled as A. So this is the advantage of having the same index value applied on number of different elements. Okay, now one problem that comes with having same value, same index value applied on the elements is that when you use slicing, when you apply slicing on such a series, so let me actually do it here. So suppose I want to go from A to B. Okay, simple. So I want to access 2 elements here, that is Tom and Ben. For that I have written this slice. So now when you run the code, you can see it shows error. Okay, and this is because the system cannot decide where to stop or where to start, because it has multiple starting points here for this slice. Okay, so whenever there are same index value getting repeated for multiple items, the slicing will not be easily applied. So that is one thing that you have to consider. Okay, so now let's see one more interesting thing about the labeled indices, that for some reasons, if you specify numeric type of labeled indices, okay, is that possible? So let me write them here. So I want the index of Tom to be 10, and then for the next value 20, then 30 and 40. Okay, let me delete this line. Okay, so this is the series right now. Let me actually run and show it to you. So this is how it looks right now. So these items Tom, Ben, Nick and Roy are having numeric indices 10, 20, 30 and 40, and these are not default ones. Okay, these are the user defined indices. Okay, so now what happens that when you try to access elements by using these numeric user defined indices, okay, the system behaves in a different way. So for example, if I write S10 here, okay, and then when you print it, you are able to access the value Tom. But when you use slicing on it, so if you write 10:30 here, okay, now what output should we get out of this? Okay, we are going 10 to 30 excluding 30, so index 10 and index 20, so I should get Tom and Ben printed on the screen, no problem. But look at the output, it shows nothing here. And what is the reason of that? Well, the reason is that when you apply slicing on a series which has numeric indices applied, numeric user defined indices applied, okay, in that case the indices used in slicing will only be looked in the default indices, will only be searched in the default indices or in the positional indices. So what are the positional indices for these four values? Okay, so you know that we have 0, 1, 2 and 3. These are the positional indices. So when you write 10:30, the index 10 and index 30, these values are searched among these four values, and obviously they are not present, so it prints nothing on the screen. So please remember that when you apply any type of numeric indexing on a series, and then when you use slicing, in that case only the default indices will be considered. Okay, so if you write 0:3 here, okay, so I should now get, this is 0, this is 1 and this is 2, so I should get Tom, Ben and Nick printed on the screen. Okay, as you can see. So alright, I hope this property is clear to you, that in slicing only the positional indices will work when you have numeric type of indexing applied on a series. Now one last thing I want to tell you about the same type of series which has numeric type of indices applied, and that is when you try to print or access a single element. So for example, I want to print Ben on screen. So what can I write for that? So S square bracket 20, as 20 is the specified labeled index for Ben. Okay, so now when you run it, you should obviously get the value printed. That's fine. But now when you try to use the positional index for accessing the same value Ben, so for that I have to write 1 here. Now obviously it looks simple and straightforward that we should get Ben printed on screen, but to our surprises, look at this. Okay, it shows error. Now this is one more interesting property that you need to remember, that when you have numeric type of indices applied, okay, and then when you try to access a single element from the series, okay, you must use only the given or labeled index for that item. Okay, it will not work on the default or positional index. So these are two interesting properties that you should remember whenever you have numeric type of indices applied on a series. Okay, so what are these two properties? Let me recall again. So the first thing is, when you use slicing, you can use only positional indices, okay, in this type of a series. And then when you want to access a single element from such a series, then you must use the labeled indices or the given indices. So these two interesting things are there. I hope they are clear to you. So please try the code on your computer. Please test this from your side, because the more you practice, the more you learn. Okay. So I hope the concepts explained in this lecture are clear to you. If you still have any query, you can always write a question in the comment box. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Do take good care. See you in my next video.